My parents and siblings treated me like an outsider at Christmas. When they said I didn't belong, I revealed the truth about the money, the sacrifices, and the love they never returned, then walked away for good. Finally free. Hi, I'm Paula Griffin and I'm 32 years old. I left my hometown over a decade ago, chasing a life my family never understood. I built something real in Dallas, but their cold shoulders never warmed. This Christmas, I went back hoping to prove I was more than their disappointment. I walked in with gifts, a smile, and a heart ready to mend. But at that dinner table, my parents stared right through me and said, "You don't deserve to be part of this dinner." The words sliced deep. I pushed my chair back, my hands trembling, and snapped, "Then don't touch the things I paid for." The room went dead quiet, every face stunned. What had I done for them all these years? Why did I leave for good? Stay with me. This story will grab you and not let go. If your family ever made you feel like an outsider, hit that like button. Share your story below and subscribe to see how I took my power back. Growing up in Wichita, Kansas, I always felt like I didn't belong. My sister Sylvia Hunt, who is 3 years older than me, was the family's shining star. She was the perfect daughter back then, always helping Mom in the kitchen, dreaming of a big wedding, and later raising her kids, Gavin and Ivy. Mom and Dad couldn't stop bragging about her. "Sylvia's got it all figured out," Mom would say, her eyes glowing with pride. Dad nodded, his smile reserved for her. My younger brother Brent got the same treatment. At 30 now, he was a mechanic with shaky jobs, always talking about expanding his own shop. But even when he messed up skipping school, crashing Dad's old Chevy, they'd laugh it off. "Boys will be boys," Dad said, ruffling Brent's hair. I was the odd one out. I loved computers, math, anything that promised a bigger world than Wich's dusty streets. But when I brought home straight A's, Mom barely glanced at my report card. "Don't get too full of yourself," she'd warn. Dad just grunted, more interested in Sylvia's pot roast. Sylvia loved the attention. She'd parade her new dresses, her baking her perfect life plans, and Mom would clap like it was a Broadway show. I remember being 10, showing off my science project, a model rocket I'd spent weeks building. Sylvia smirked, saying, "Who cares about that nerd stuff?" Mom chuckled, and Dad didn't even look up from his newspaper. Brent was worse. He'd tease me relentlessly, calling me brainiac or hiding my books just to see me squirm. Once at 13, I won a math competition and I was so excited to tell everyone. I ran home certificate in hand only to find Sylvia getting praise for her brownies. "They're just like your grandma's." Mom beamed. My certificate sat untouched on the counter. Brent snickered. "Nobody cares about your numbers, Paula." I swallowed the hurt, but it piled up. Family dinners were the worst. Sylvia would dominate, talking about her high school sweetheart or her cheerleading squad. Mom and Dad hung on her every word while I could barely get a sentence in. If I mentioned my dream of working in tech, Mom would cut me off. "Why can't you be practical like Sylvia?" she'd say. Dad added, "You don't need to go chasing big ideas." Brent would just roll his eyes, tossing peas at me under the table. I felt invisible, like I was shouting into a void. By 15, I started eating in my room, claiming I had homework. Really, I just couldn't take the constant comparisons. School was my escape. I threw myself into coding clubs, math teams, anything that kept me out of the house. My teachers saw something in me, encouraging me to apply for scholarships to aim for college out of state. But at home, it was like I didn't exist unless I was failing. Once I overheard Mom telling a neighbor, "Sylvia's our pride and Brent's got charm." "Paula, she's just different." That word stung worse than anything. Different. Like I was a mistake. Brent's antics, like sneaking out or blowing his paycheck on a new stereo, never got him labeled that way. Sylvia's perfect life was untouchable while I was the problem. By my senior year, I was done trying to fit in. I worked weekends at a local diner, saving every tip for college. Sylvia was planning her wedding, and Brent was partying with his garage buddies. Mom and Dad barely noticed when I got accepted to a university in Texas. "You're leaving us?" Mom asked, more annoyed than sad. Dad just shrugged. "Do what you want," he said. I packed my dreams and my hurt, knowing I'd have to build a life where I wasn't the outsider. Wichita had no place for me, and I was ready to prove them wrong. At 18, I packed my bags and left for Dallas. Wichita's weight, those endless comparisons to Sylvia, Brent's taunts. Mom and Dad's indifference pushed me out the door. I'd earned a scholarship to study computer science at a university in Texas, and I wasn't looking back. Dallas hit me like a jolt, skyscraper's ambition, a world that didn't care about my family's expectations. I threw myself into my studies, pulling all-nighters in the computer lab, building apps and soaking up every lecture. By my senior year, I landed an internship at a tech firm, debugging code and impressing my boss. After graduation, I stayed in Dallas, taking a full-time job as a software project coordinator. By 25, I was a project manager running teams, launching apps for major companies, and pulling in a six-figure salary. I bought a sleek condo downtown, my own space, far from the diner shifts I'd worked as a teen. I thought my family might notice, might finally see me as more than the oddball. I was wrong. I called home to share my first big promotion, my voice buzzing with pride. Mom cut me off. "Sounds fancy," she said, then pivoted to Sylvia's new casserole recipe. Dad mumbled about the cost of gas, barely listening. I tried again, telling them about a project I'd led, but Sylvia jumped in, gushing about her kids' school awards. Brent snorted. "What? You're some hotshot now?" Their words stung, but I kept calling, hoping for a spark of interest. It never came. The calls dwindled weekly, then monthly. They rarely asked me to come home for Thanksgiving or Christmas. "You've got your life out there," Mom said once, her tone sharp like I'd chosen to abandon them. Dad didn't bother to argue. 3 years ago at 29, I started sending them money. Brent was scrambling to open his own repair shop, but he couldn't afford the startup costs rent a hydraulic lift tools. I sent $25,000 through a friend to cover it, then $1,000 a month to help him pay bills and keep the place running. I didn't tell him it was me. I didn't want his half-hearted thanks or his attitude. Mom and Dad were struggling too. Dad's pension was thin, and Mom's part-time gig at a local store wasn't enough. Their bills piled up: electricity, groceries, a roof that leaked every spring. I sent $1,500 a month for their utilities, food, and repairs funneled through the same friend to stay anonymous. I wasn't chasing their approval. I just wanted them to be okay. Maybe to see I wasn't the failure they thought. But nothing changed. Our calls were clipped 3 minutes of small talk before Mom brought up Sylvia's perfect life or Brent's latest plan. Dad's responses were grunts, if he spoke at all. I stopped visiting Wicha after a disastrous Christmas 4 years ago. I'd driven in hoping to connect, but Sylvia dominated with stories of her new house, and Brent bragged about a car he'd fixed. My attempt to share a work win got a quick "that's nice" from Mom before she changed the topic. I left early, my chest tight, and promised myself I'd never feel that small again. Still, I kept sending the money, holding on to some foolish hope they'd care someday. Dallas became my world. I had friends who cheered my successes, a job that pushed me to grow a life I'd built from nothing. But every call to Wicha was a reminder of the gap between us. I'd hang up staring at my phone wondering why I still tried. They didn't know about the money and I didn't tell them. It wasn't about credit. It was about proving I was enough. Their silence said otherwise, and the distance grew, not just in miles, but in everything that mattered. I was done waiting for them to see me. This Christmas, I decided to give my family another chance. I'd been away from Wicha for years, and the silence from Mom, Dad, Sylvia, and Brent weighed heavier than I wanted to admit. Maybe this time they'd see me, the real me, not the kid they'd ignored. I booked a first-class flight to Wicha, splurging for the comfort I'd earned. I rented a sleek black SUV, the kind that turned heads to drive up to their doorstep in style. I wanted them to know I wasn't scraping by anymore. I spent weeks picking out gifts, pouring thought into each one. For Mom, a high-end laptop to replace her clunky old desktop that took 10 minutes to boot. For Sylvia's kids, Gavin and Ivy, I chose interactive science kits, hoping they'd spark some curiosity. For Sylvia and her husband, a weekend getaway voucher to a resort in Colorado, a chance to escape their routine. These weren't just presents. They were my way of saying I'd made it, that I cared enough to try again. I called my best friend, Carla Dixon, to talk it through. Carla and I met in Dallas during my first year at the tech firm, bonding over late-night coffee and shared ambition. She knew my family's history, how they'd brushed me off since I was a kid, how their calls grew shorter with every year. "You're setting yourself up for a letdown," she warned, her voice gentle but firm. "They've never valued you," I sighed, pacing my condo. "I know, Carla, but what if this time's different? What if they see the gifts, see me, and actually care?" She paused, then said, "Just don't let them walk all over you again." Her words stuck, but I pushed them aside. I wanted to believe in a better outcome, in a family that might finally listen. Planning the trip felt like preparing for battle. I double-checked the flight, the rental car, the gift wrapping. I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd tell them about my job, my team, the app launches I'd led. I imagined Mom smiling, Dad asking questions, Sylvia listening instead of interrupting. But doubt crept in. What if they ignored me again? What if the gift sat unopened like my old science fair trophy? Carla's warning echoed in my head. I'd spent years building a life in Dallas, proving I didn't need their approval. Yet, here I was, chasing it again. I packed my suitcase, folding each shirt with care, as if neatness could shield me from their coldness. The laptop, the science kits, the voucher, went into a separate bag, each one a fragile hope. The night before the flight, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my balcony, staring at Dallas's skyline, my stomach in knots. I'd left Wicha to escape, being invisible, but going back felt like walking into the same trap. I called Carla again. Am I crazy for doing this? I asked, my voice tight. No, she said. But you're braver than I'd be. Just promise you'll stand up for yourself. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. I wanted to walk into that house with my head high to show them the woman I'd become. But deep down, I feared they'd still see the awkward kid they never understood. The plane ticket sat on my counter, a reminder of the risk I was taking. I was heading home not to beg for their love, but to prove I deserved a seat at their table. Driving into Wichita, I felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. The rented SUV gleamed as I pulled up to my parents' house, its familiar brick facade, stirring memories I'd tried to bury. I grabbed the gift bag heavy with the laptop, science kits and getaway voucher, and stepped out, hoping this visit would be different. Mom opened the door, her smile thin. "Paula, you're here," she said, her tone more beautiful than warm. Dad glanced up from his armchair, muttering a quick, "Hey," before turning back to the football game. Sylvia was already in the living room, fussing over Gavin and Ivy's holiday sweaters. Brent walked in with his fiancée, Marcy Wells, who gave a shy nod, but stayed close to him. "Long drive?" Brent asked, his voice casual like I was a distant cousin. I forced a smile, clutching the gifts, determined to prove I belonged. The house smelled of pine and cinnamon, but the warmth stopped there. Mom handed me a string of Christmas lights to hang. So, I joined Sylvia in decorating the tree. I tried to break the ice, mentioning a recent project I'd led in Dallas, a software rollout for a national chain. "Sounds complicated," Sylvia said, barely looking up as she adjusted an ornament. Then she launched into a story about Avi's school art project, her voice bright with pride. Mom nodded along, hanging tinsel while Dad stayed glued to the TV. I kept going, describing a tech award my team had won. But Brent cut in, tossing tinsel at Gavin. "My shop's getting new lifts next month," he said, grinning. "Big upgrade." Marcy beamed, adding, "He's been working non-stop." I waited for someone to ask about me, but the conversation swung back to Sylvia's kids. We moved to the couch, the tree now sparkling, and I helped Mom arrange candles on the mantel. I tried again, sharing how I'd spoken at a conference in San Francisco. "That's nice," Mom said. But her eyes were on Sylvia, who was showing photos of Gavin's soccer game on her phone. "He scored twice," Sylvia said. And Dad finally looked up, chuckling. "That's my grandson." Brent jumped in, talking about a truck he'd rebuilt, how it drew customers to his shop. Marcy nodded, her arm linked with his, sat there, the gift bag at my feet, feeling like a stranger. My stories about Dallas, my life, my work fell flat, drowned out by their chatter. Sylvia's kids ran around giggling, and the adults orbited them, their voices loud, their attention elsewhere. The air grew heavy, not with holiday cheer, but with the same old dismissal I'd known since childhood. I adjusted a candle, my hand steady, despite the ache in my chest. I'd come back hoping to bridge the gap to show them who I'd become, but they didn't care. Mom fussed over Sylvia's kids. Dad praised Brent's hustle, and my words were just background noise. I mentioned a promotion. I'd earned my voice louder than I meant, but Sylvia cut me off. "Avi's starting piano lessons," she said, as if my life didn't matter. Brent smirked, tossing a candy cane to Marcy, and Dad didn't even glance my way. The knot in my stomach tightened, a familiar sting of being overlooked, pushed aside for their favorites. I wasn't part of their world, not even in this house I'd grown up in. When we sat down for dinner, I noticed something wrong. Mom's festive table sparkled with her fancy plates, but there were only 7 chairs, one each, for Mom, Dad, Sylvia, her husband, Gavin, Ivy, Brent, and Marcy. I stood frozen, the gift bag still in my hand. As everyone settled in, my heart thudded dead. I scanned the table again, hoping I'd miscounted. I hadn't. "Where's my seat?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Mom glanced up, her expression cold. Dad's eyes flicked to me, sharp and unyielding. Sylvia paused, her napkin halfway to her lap while Brent looked down. Marcy shifted in her chair and Sylvia's kids chattered unaware. The clatter of plates felt louder than my question, and the silence that followed crushed me. Dad put down his fork, his face hard. "You don't deserve to be part of this dinner," he said, each word like a blade. Mom nodded, her arms crossed. "You've been too busy with your Dallas career, Paula. You walked away from this family." The accusation stung raw and bitter like a wound torn open. I stared at them, waiting for a crack in their resolve, a hint of softness. Nothing. Sylvia leaned forward, her voice sharp. "You're never around. You chose your job over us." Brent stayed quiet, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth while Marcy bit her lip, avoiding me. Gavin and Ivy giggled over their juice, oblivious to the tension. I felt the air leave the room, my chest tight like I was 10 years old again, begging to be seen. My hands gripped the gift bag, the weight of the laptop, science kits, and getaway voucher mocking my effort. I'd flown first class, rented an SUV, Spent weeks planning this trip to prove I was enough. And now I stood here, an outsider in the house I grew up in. Walked away, I said, my voice trembling with hurt. I've called, I've tried, but you never cared. Mom scoffed, her eyes narrowing. Don't play the victim. You left us for your big shot life. Dad's stare was ice. This table's for family who stay, not ones who run off. Sylvia's nod felt like a smirk, her agreement cutting deeper than their words. Brent's silence was its own betrayal, louder than any argument. The pain was searing, dragging up every moment I'd been overlooked, every report card ignored, every achievement dismissed. While Sylvia and Brent were praised, the 7 chairs were their verdict. I wasn't family. The realization hit like a wave, drowning the hope I'd carried. My throat burned, but I wouldn't let them see me break. Anger surged hot and fierce, clawing past the hurt. I tightened my grip on the bag, my pulse racing. I'd come to mend things, but they'd drawn a line. Now I was ready to push back. That was the last straw. Their words, Dad's cold verdict, Mom's agreement. Sylvia's smug nod ignited something inside me. I stood up my chair, scraping the floor, the sound cutting through the clink of glasses. The gift bag sat at my feet, its contents now irrelevant. My hand shook, but my voice was steady. You think I abandoned you? I said, looking from Mom to Dad to Sylvia. Let me tell you what I've done for this family. The room went still. Gavin and Ivy stopped giggling, their wide eyes on me. Brent shifted. Marcy's hand froze on her glass and Sylvia's husband looked up confused. I took a breath, the truth burning in my throat. I paid $25,000 to start Brent's repair shop and $1,000 every month since to keep it running. For 3 years, I've sent Mom and Dad $1,500 a month for your bills, electricity, groceries, house repairs, all from Dallas. While you called me selfish, the silence was suffocating. Sylvia's jaw dropped, her face pale. Brent's eyes widened, his fork clattering to his plate. Marcy gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Mom's face flushed, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for words. Dad sat rigid, his gaze fixed on the table, not meeting mine. That's not true. Sylvia stammered, her voice high and panicked. You're making it up. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Check your bank statement, Sylvia. I sent the money anonymously because I didn't want your pity or your thanks. I wanted you to see me as family. Brent looked at me, his face a mix of shock and guilt, muttering, I didn't know. Marcy's eyes darted between us, her expression stunned. Gavin and Ivy shrank back, sensing the tension. Then don't touch the things I paid for, I said, my voice rising clear and unyielding. I pushed my chair back further, the screech echoing in the quiet. As of today, the money stops. All of it. No more checks for the shop, Brent. No more for your bills, Mom. Dad, you don't want me at this table. Fine. You don't get my help either. Sylvia's eyes welled up, her hands trembling. You can't do that, she cried. We need that money. Mom jumped in, her voice, desperate. Paula, you're overreacting. We didn't know it was you. Let's talk about this. I shook my head, my resolve like steel. You didn't know because you never asked. You never cared. You made it clear I'm not family, so I'm done trying. Dad stayed silent, his face unreadable, his hands clasped tight. Brent rubbed his forehead, mumbling, I thought it was a loan from a friend. Marcy reached for his arm, her face, pale, clearly caught off guard. Sylvia's husband looked down, avoiding the chaos. The kids clung to Sylvia, confused. I felt the weight of their shock, but it didn't soften me. For years, I'd carried their burdens, hoping for a shred of respect. They'd thrown it back in my face, and I was done. I grabbed the gift bag, its contents, a reminder of my misplaced hope. I came here to fix things, I said, my voice low but firm. But you've shown me where I stand. I'm not begging for your love anymore. I turned toward the door, my heart pounding, but my head high. Sylvia's voice cracked, pleading, Paula, wait, we can work this out. Mom echoed her tone softer now, almost frantic. Don't leave like this. We're still family. But their words were too late, hollow after years of dismissal. Dad's silence said more than their protests. Brent's confusion, Marcy's shock, Sylvia's panic. They all blurred into the background. I'd spent years building a life in Dallas, proving I didn't need their approval. Now I was proving it to them. My steps were steady as I walked out, the cold witch air waiting beyond the door. I wasn't just leaving the dinner. I was leaving their world, and I wouldn't look back. I walked out that door and never looked back. The witch night was sharp and cold, the stars hidden by clouds as I climbed into my rented SUV. I steadied my hands on the wheel, thinking about the gift bags I'd left at their house, the last gifts I'd ever give them. I drove straight to the airport, booked the first flight to Dallas, and blocked their numbers. Mom, Dad, Sylvia, Brent, before the plane even took off. By morning, I was back in my apartment, the city's skyline, a quiet comfort. I didn't cry. I didn't regret it. For the first time, I felt free, unburdened by the weight of their expectations or their dismissal. I'd given them everything: money, time, hope, and they'd thrown it away. Now I was done. Back in Wichita, the consequences of my decision rippled through their lives. Brent's repair shop, once propped up by my 1,000 monthly transfers, began to struggle. Without that support, he couldn't afford new equipment or cover slow months. Customers dwindled, and within a year he faced a choice: sell the shop at a loss or go back to working for someone else. His dreams of expansion, the new lifts he'd boasted about, vanished. Marcy stood by him, but the strain showed their engagement tested by long hours and tight budgets. Brent never reached out to me, his pride or guilt keeping him silent, and I didn't care to hear his excuses. Mom and Dad struggled without the $1,500 I'd sent each month. The electricity bill piled up and they cut back on groceries, skipping the Brandom coffee Mom loved. Home repairs went undone. The leaky roof, the creaky porch, because they couldn't afford a handyman. They applied for loans, but their credit was shaky and the interest rates were brutal. Dad's stubborn silence held firm, but Mom called. Once, leaving a voicemail I deleted, unheard. Sylvia, stretched thin by her own family's needs, stepped in to help with their bills. The extra cost strained her household, sparking arguments with her husband over money. Gavin and Ivy felt the tension, their carefree chatter replaced by quiet unease at home. In Dallas, I threw myself into my life with a clarity I hadn't known before. My tech firm promoted me to lead a new AI division, a role that demanded long hours but filled me with purpose. I spent weekends with Carla, my closest friend, who'd warned me about the trip to Wichita. Over coffee, she listened as I unpacked the years of trying to win my family's approval. "You're enough," she said, her words a balm to the wounds they'd left. I built new connections, colleagues, mentors, a running group that met at dawn. My apartment became a sanctuary filled with plants and books, not memories of rejection. I wasn't running from my past anymore. I was choosing my future. Looking back, I saw the lesson carved into every moment of that Christmas disaster. Self-respect and setting boundaries matter more than chasing acceptance from a family that doesn't value you. I'd spent years believing I needed their love to feel whole, but they'd never seen me. Not as a child, not as an adult. Walking away wasn't just about cutting ties. It was about claiming my worth. I didn't need their table, their approval, or their grudging gratitude. I had my own life built on my terms, and that was enough. To everyone who's followed this story to its end, thank you for listening. Family can be a source of strength, but sometimes it's a source of pain. If this resonates with you, I hope you find the courage to set your own boundaries, to choose yourself when others won't. Share your thoughts below. What would you have done in my place? Your stories matter and I'd love to hear.